Hey, before we dive in, I want to invite you to take a moment and check out the show notes in the link below. We've crafted something really special here, a full set of reflections, tools, and teachings designed to help you deepen in this work long after the episode ends. This isn't just a recap, it's a living library, built with care to support your awakening. Just that shift is central to the purpose of my life as I see it.
Yes. Yeah. Now you're on to a key dynamic of spirituality, and that's the sense of purpose.
Hello, my friend. Have you ever wondered if stress could actually be sacred? What if your biggest challenges weren't trying to break you, but awaken you? In this episode of Olaf and Eric on Eric's Mindset platform, we explore stress, identity, and the deep spiritual reality behind the lives we live. Olaf brings powerful metaphors, scriptural wisdom, and deep stories from a lifetime in spiritual care. I bring in the metaphysical, sharing what it's like to feel the pressure of transformation from the inside out. And as always, I'm just very grateful. Grateful for this work, grateful for this path, and grateful for you, our audience, who chose to go deeper with us and whom we couldn't do this without. Let's keep walking this path together. Let's get into it. Yeah, so welcome to the Olaf and Eric show. And I always like to throw you for a little bit of a loop anyways.
Yes, sir.
So one of the interesting parts of this is, I consider you a good friend, and you've been a coach to me for over 10 years now. Now, there's an interesting aspect to going from that relationship to this, is that I really didn't know you in certain ways. So in a coaching situation, you're not trying to impress upon someone, as a coach, you're not trying to impress upon somebody else your viewpoints with things. Right. You're being their advocate. Yes. You're working within their model of the world to help them through things. Right. And so, but then we come into this situation, and now you're giving your own opinion, and all of a sudden you have an opinion on things. I'm like, who is this guy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, this shows the power of, and sociology gets into this, and social psychology, the role definitions, and that we take on personas befitting the role situation. And those personas convey characteristics of me, certain emphases of my total self. And you're right. This is a different role situation. We are equal. We're partners.
Right.
And so I appreciate, the inference that it's an adjustment. Mm-hmm. And how's it going for you?
Well, it's interesting. Right now, all of a sudden, I'm like I can't remember the reference, but I'm like a goldfish. Like all of a sudden I'm on to the next thing, which is my camera angles. I'm looking at my camera angles to see if they're, what do I need to adjust next? But as far as the relationship, it's interesting. Okay, so for instance, now I was telling you how I was undergoing significant stress. Yes. And I could talk about that. And now in the past, if I would have made, I think I make sense of things in terms of how I view the world and existence, and sure. As I think anybody does. And so now, one of the ways that I see the world is that I think that I don't want to. I feel like I've reincarnated into this lifetime many, many times. Now, if we take the idea of time is an illusion out of it, because if time is an illusion that we create on this Earth planet, there is no sequential lifetimes. Reincarnation
just in that aspect is an illusion itself. But the way I see this is actually it's like the veins, just like nature grows itself into fractal patterns.
Yeah.
This is how I see awareness, both on a localized level of the individual soul and a larger level of, the all that is. Now, if we take the time thing out of the equation, I feel as if I am at the end of what you would call the cycle of life and death, the cycle of life and rebirth. I'm at the end of that. And there's a common story that people that feel that they're at this stage in their spiritual unfoldment or evolution is that you put extreme amounts of stress and we'll just say it simply. Well, you put extreme amounts of stress and you go through a lot of things at this stage because you're sort of done. You're done with it, and you just want to get through the last spoonfuls and be done with the whole process.
Stress.
Now, if we come back to how is it going with the switch from coaching to this relationship with you is like it takes on a different meaning, because before I knew what your maybe viewpoints were on reincarnation, and me coming to you with that has a whole different meaning than when I come to you with that now. So because now I know a little bit more about what your viewpoints might be, and I'll let you speak for yourself on that. So that would be one of the things that there's some getting used to that.
Yeah. It's and from my standpoint, it's a forwarding step. It's an adjustment in the sense of opening up my autobiographical self, but in my imaginative framework, it's an easier adjustment than I imagine yours to be. Because for me to shift to expressing myself more autobiographically, so to speak, and exposing to you sides of me that properly wasn't to be shared while I was more the coacher knew the coachee. But now we sort of are co-coaching or co-sharing insights from our intensely engaged forays into spirituality, into the magic of it, the majesty of it, the mystery of it. And you have developed a refined, mature, broad, and deep understanding of metaphysics. And you're into areas that are beyond my forays. So when you talk about like reincarnation, that for me is like your area of expertise, if you will, or understanding. I have never denied that as some element possible in our lives, but I've never gone into it and affirmed it. So I've kind of let it stand there. I'm very happy to live in ambiguity and to let a spiritual system of understanding just speak and have its claim and say, okay, I don't understand it, but that doesn't mean that I have a right to poo-poo it, shove it aside, say, oh, nonsense. No. I say, okay, and maybe there will be a time when I may be called or need to or want to go into that understanding and gain some wisdom. It's all about knowing and understanding reality and ourselves and truly what sacredness and humanness is about.
Right. Okay, so that's where, see, I must have heard you wrong. I could have sworn I heard you one time say, well, no, I don't believe in reincarnation at all. And it kind of threw me for a loop. And now you're saying you wouldn't have said something like that. So I believe you.
And
so
who knows? Maybe I did. Maybe I was stupid, or maybe I don't know.
Yeah,
I know I don't feel and think that way.
Yeah, that's what I thought I heard in the moment.
Yes.
And it sort of threw me off. So those are the types of adjustments.
Right.
But I was talking about how, I had been, I kind of shut it when you came in today. You asked me how I was doing, and I started to tell you, my stress is stress had stress.
Right.
And then I sort of shut down because I wanted to save it for the recording.
Right.
So, it's like the only way I could describe it is that it's like I think of it like a layer cake. It's like there's sometimes there is this deep stress on top of stress on top.
Levels of stress.
So in the past, I at this point, I would have long since fallen off the wagon, and started to drink just to deal with the amount of stress. And I'm like many of us, I take on a lot of things. I don't make life easy on myself. I certainly, you want to be all the things to all the people and earn all the things and just, be that big grand success you were taught to be and dreaming of as a child.
Okay.
And so,
aspiration.
Yes.
Yes.
However, I think there's a different lesson. And this is the way I see it, is that there is a me. There's shows I've been watching lately. One of them is called Severance. Severance is an interesting show. It's on Apple Plus. It's sort of loosely based on a book called by Dr. Rick and somebody, who makes a cameo in the show itself. And it's about how when you certain jobs are called severed jobs.
Oh, I've seen 1 or 2 episodes. Yes.
Yeah. So when you take this job, you get this implanted microchip, and when you go into work, you don't remember anything about your life outside of work. And when you're outside of work, you don't remember anything about your life inside of work. And effectively, you become the person. You become two different people. And the person that's in work is effectively imprisoned in work, unless the person outside of work says otherwise. Because that's the only life that you know while you're in there. You have no memory otherwise.
Your self-knowledge is a worker knowledge, and it's just limited to that.
Now, yes. Now, what this makes, and I did try reading the book. I couldn't get into it at the time. It is interesting, but sometimes you pick up a book and it's just not what you're looking to read in the moment. But I was I can't remember the name of it, but I'm very into looking into the eternal presence of self, the self that is the self throughout eternity. And now, to keep this simple, there is a me that is, like you talked about. There is a me for this podcast. There is a me that is a dad. There is a me that is, a worker. There's a me that's a lover, and even within those personas, there are multiple sub personas.
Yeah.
And these personas overlay each other the way I see it. Like, what is it? What is that? A Venn diagram? What is that? Where the circles overlay on top of each other?
Yeah, a Venn diagram has a bunch of words that are interrelated to each other, and some words take prominency. They're the biggest. And then there's a whole bunch of other words. And you look at it, and you begin to see these sub-connections, and you begin to understand why the lead words, the big ones, are what they are. It's kind of there, and kind of a logic, to, like if you had a cup with abilities of NBA players, 3-point shots, 3-point shooting would be pretty big letters, but playing good defense, also pretty big letters, and they would be repeated throughout. but there would be other things, sets picks, blocks well, aggravates opponents well, messes with opponents' play, well, is our team energizer, is our team, ass kicker, whatever. So the Venn diagram would sort of expose, the importance of certain functions, but they're all on the cup of success.
But it shows how these things are interrelated.
Exactly.
Okay. So
Yes.
I believe that's exactly what I'm thinking about. And that's what I think about when I think about personalities, not personality traits, personalities that we play. They're in a sense that they're characters.
Right.
So I'll give you an example of, I can enter a meditative state, and it happens on a daily basis.
Yeah.
To some extent that I don't have to sit in a lotus position and chant or anything like that. It's just I could be driving down the road, or I could just be whatever it is.
Yep.
And you enter a state where there is really sanguine. Is that the right? Like you very
sanguine.
a Zen state.
Yes.
Where for me, I think of it as like all of a sudden I remember the secrets of the universe. I'm very connected and very peaceful and very Zen. And I can't even remember how my problems could be problems from that state of mind. It doesn't even make sense to have problems. But then I come over here into this other state where I've created this persona to deal with this other thing in life. And maybe this persona is frantic and worried about money or relationship or children or, things to do with your home. And so I'm drawing that parallel with severance, is that it seems as if, to me, whether they are in recognition of it or not, I don't know if that's what they're trying to say, but I see that parallel where we have these different personalities. And we're looking to sort of bring part of the purpose in life for me is to remember the one, no matter what personality that I'm in. So no matter what personality I might be in at that time, I'm remembering back to the eternal self. If that makes sense.
I refer to it as at the center of my intrapersonal existence is the I am. And that mirrors the I am that's in scriptural writ in the book of Exodus. The Yahweh literally means I am being what or who I am being. And I am is not a noun, it's a verb. I am is living action and living relating. It's not like an entity. I don't find it. In some sense, it finds me. As I am expressing, there is a feedback mechanism where I get a sense of who I am, but it's always a relational verb aspect, not a noun. When we noun ourselves, so to speak, that bespeaks of an egoistic take. Ego becomes in charge. Or to put it another way, to use the language of a neuropsychologist, Damasio, you become stuck in your memory self, your autobiographical self. We carry with us understandings, with us, but they are not the substance of who we are. Because I am is a continuing living verb self, and you tag that as expression of the eternal self. And one difference in how we maybe frame it and understand it, and it's not a matter of right and wrong, it's a matter of emphasis. Being technically a panentheist, I say that I am in the sacred, and the sacred's I am is in me, but it implies a relationship, not a unity, but a co-unity. Kind of like a yin and a yang. It's a co-unity that feels singular. And I believe that the singular sense of that co-unity can lend one to say, I am eternal. And that sense, I think, comes out of that sort of core.
That's one of those type of perceptual differences that should be looked at and understood between people. It's sort of the type of thing that I think religious wars could be fought over for millennia. Just those little details.
It can,
but I think that,
and that's stupid.
Yeah,
wrong,
destructive. Yeah, maybe I'm being a little bit, I don't know, obtuse in saying it that way.
No. You're being historical. You're being real.
Yeah, just that shift is central to the purpose of my life as I see it.
Yes. Now you're on to a key dynamic of spirituality, and that's the sense of purpose.
Right. And so the sense of purpose for me is to recognize self as the divine. You recognize yourself as divine, though you are in this illusory world that you created for yourself.
Okay.
And when we start to get into the word self, you'll have to translate, because we're talking about universal self, not personal self. We're not talking about the egoic self of Eric. We're talking about recognizing the universal self while incarnate. Yeah.
It's where to go?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Let me go back to when you were talking about kind of the meditative state of mind. You don't have to make it a big deal. It can happen while you're driving. It can happen while you're walking. Reflective moments, but mindfulness. And in those moments of mindfulness, there's this feeling of connectivity to the ultimate, to the eternal, to the ultimate. And I identify with you fully. There we are, in a sense, walking brothers. You and I have talked about the intensity of the connective sense when we walk in nature, kind of alone, away from noises, and we feel the presence of sacredness. And however we process that, it is the immersion in a sense of connectivity that produces a sense of peace,
right?
A sense of wholeness. And on the one hand, it can seem kind of elusive, especially if we try to talk about it and explain it. But on the other hand, in our own internal experience, it is so core. It's like, this is it.
Right.
But it's not an it like my car, It's truly, to use a tricky word, ethereal. But ethereal that's real, not ethereal that's wishy-washy, puffy, cloudy. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Just to backtrack to the stress for a minute, because we do. I think it's such a common part of life nowadays, and it has been for quite some time. I'm not saying something new.
High stress.
High stress.
Yes.
High stress. There's always something
Agreed.
that we're highly stressed about.
Yeah.
On both individual and larger social levels. Not to say that I have the answer, but for me, when I get to those points, and this lately, there's the like I said, the stress. My stress has stress. Is like this multifaceted, multi-layered stress. But I happen to hear, I'm the type of guy that not believes but sees at a core level that the universe, that God is communicating with me, with that every particle and quark in existence and wave and energy form is communicating with me at every moment.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I'll hear things, I'll tune into something that is very apropos to whatever I might be having difficulty with in the moment. And I just so happened to see it was a rabbi on YouTube who gave a story about a lobster, and he says the lobster A lobster grows. A lobster is a soft-shelled animal that grows, but its shell does not grow. It lives inside this hard shell that doesn't grow. So when the lobster needs to grow, what does it do? Well, it comes under a tremendous amount of stress living within this shell it no longer fits within. And so it has to go under a rock, and it molts its old shell, and it goes under the rock to hide from animals that would otherwise be predatory towards it, and it grows a new shell. And the point of the story is that, we come under this tremendous stress in order to grow.
Right. I love that illustration.
Yeah.
I think it's a great metaphor or analogy. I think it's the metaphor is the term.
Yeah. Well,
for our spiritual growth, it's kind of like, I live episodically, like when I was had this kind of job and was the director of an agency, adopted foster care agency for a couple of years, I had a kind of an array of persona shells, kind of a composite shell. I was a director of an agency, and I was related to other directors and got into the fray of politics, and then there was a crisis in our agency and had to negotiate that with the press and so on and so forth. A kid died under, the care of the agency's foster care system. And how do you handle that? And as a director, it all comes on you, like the coach of a losing team, like, why did you lose that game? Why did you lose that kid? What's wrong with you guys? And you're supposed to be, on the one hand, transparent and honest with the public and work with the press, but work with the press in such a way that they don't distort the truth, and so on and so forth. And it worked well. But then eventually there were factors that stressed me in ways that I did not handle very well. And in this sense, it was one of two times in my long professional journey where I was asked to leave. But when you're an exec, they don't, quote, fire you. They sort of say, here's a severance, goodbye, which in effect is firing, and in retrospect, I can say, well, I deserved it, and in a sense, the shell was taken off me, and I had to go under a rock, so to speak, kind of a psychological rock, self-protecting, recovering my sense of integrity. Hey, that doesn't make me a loser, even though I lost in that situation, but what can I also gain? And so I started developing a new shell, so to speak, professional shell, which then led me to, the next step. And in the meantime, the system also, worked with me. They saw, hey, this is a capable person. This was just kind of maybe the wrong coach for the wrong team in a pretty short time. I mean, some coaches in NBA are fired after a year or after 2 years. Hey, you're a good coach, but it just didn't fit here. And so, but I really relate to that illustration, and I think it's part of our psycho-spiritual journey. There are times when we choose to de-shell ourselves. And then there are times when the shell might be kind of ripped off by circumstances, and it's more hurtful because it might be kind of surprising and so on. But stress, when I studied stress, and when I was a director of a spiritual care department at a hospital some years later, but while I was there, I really studied stress and had a program on stress management for staff. And what I learned is, the stress is necessary for our life. Hans Selye, one of the original stress researchers, said, stress is the salt of life. But there's a sweet spot. Too much stress, destructive. Too little stress, also destructive. Apathy versus freak out, stress upon stress upon stress. And it's not always easy to find the stress sweet spot where it's just enough to push me and to incentivize me, but not too much. And a writer whose name is so I cannot spell, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he wrote a book on flow, and they did stress studies, and the word flow is another word for the sweet spot. The ideal is when what's demanded upon me, I feel like I can do. And the sweet spot includes what's demanded upon me is stretching me, but not too quick, too far. It's like a coach saying, hey, you can do more, and we're going to make you do more. You're going to practice doing more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sweet spot stress. That's salty, good. But if they're demanding too much that doesn't fit my abilities, your job as a 6'2" guy is to set a pick on the moosey 7'2" guy and get smashed. Are you sure, coach, is there a better role for me? You know what I'm saying?
I do.
But the danger is also apathy, where people give up on the meaningfulness and the purposefulness of their lives, and go into kind of a just existing, a zombieing, kind of a flat, not in flow, into apathy. Apatheia means you have lost your passion for life.
Well, yeah.
For living.
Yeah, well, and it can get confusing. And I think that's all part of the struggles along the path, is that I know I certainly have gotten to points where I'm like, look, I thought I was, living my soul's purpose here. Why am I running up against a brick wall?
Mm-hmm.
There are times that I've given up on things that I was working on, thinking, well, it shouldn't be this hard if I'm living my, well, just to say it simply, my soul's purpose, or if I'm, it shouldn't be this hard. I don't,
mm-hmm.
and I no longer think that that's the case.
Right. I agree with you.
I think that you run up against obstacles and trials and tribulations
mm-hmm.
in order to make sure you really want it, really, in order to grow in the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like resistance in weightlifting. You accept resistance, more resistance to fight against, and you build up musculature.
That's a perfect example. Yeah.
And that goes on all levels of our existence, including the spiritual, the psychological, emotional, a broken relationship that leads to fracture and maybe even divorce. That's hard tribulation. That's not easy for people. But out of that tribulation can come insight and realization and an empowerment of how to have a more fruitful relationship in the future. And I used to do foster adopt studies of new parents who want to be a stepmother or stepfather to the children. And I worked for an agency where, as a side job, we worked for the legal system to study a family and adopt request to see if that was, a healthy one, a good one, and to say to the judge, the legal system, hey, this is the real deal. And of course, in those situations, there was 1 or 2 divorces, a divorced person. And so part of their story was to share the pain, the walls, if you will, and, that they bumped up against. But to a person in my studies over several years, they grew.
Mm-hmm.
They grew to become better partners, better lovers, better friends to those that they lived with.
Yeah, well, so I think that we give ourselves the message that if you're on, God's path for you, then things get much easier and brighter and things go your way. And that's, I don't think that that's the case. I think that you of course still come up to resistance.
That's right.
And I think when we hit that resistance, all of a sudden we start to lose hope, as if
mm-hmm.
we aren't enough to this is never going to go my way. This is for other people. Look at all
mm-hmm.
the resistance that I'm being met with. But
mm-hmm.
the resistance just means that you need to become the type of person that can overcome that resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? With the same as what you've said about the strength training.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
right. it's really interesting that I have shared that one of the spiritual practices that I do when I go to a worship service, in this case, in the Christian tradition, go to a Protestant church, and it has fabulous music, professional level, and so on, and a meaningful service. But part of my practice is when I take the bread and the wine, which we call the sacrament in Christian tradition, which, repeats the last meal of the Christ, Jesus, saying, "This is a new covenant in this bread, expressed in this bread, the bread of life, and expressed in this cup, the cup of love." And so we remind ourselves week to week in a worship context of this, the new covenant is one where we live on the bread of life. And that's just, the bread becomes like a metaphor of all of the, quote, breads, unquote, of life. Water, love, meaningful, purposeful activity, play, all of that is bread of life. And the centrality of love, sacrificial love, And whenever I open up, I read and look for the message. It's not how I interpret the message, but it's how the message interprets me. And I look at it that way. Where is the ruah dabar, meaning the breath of the sacred word? Where is the energy of the sacred word that touches not just my mind, but my soul? And I am open to that. And what I'm coming to is the point that you talked about, resistance. And Psalm 118 talks about the dangers and the resistance, the dangers and the resistance. And I'm feeling that politically and economically in our climate today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling very endangered, not just personally, but for the sake of democratic loving peoples all over the world. And so that is the resistances I feel. And the two words that were repeated throughout the psalm and that I took into my soul and that fed my spirit, as a breath word of the sacred, was, "I am your refuge and I am your strength." And this is not meant to be escapist from the stress of being a civic-minded person who cares about what happens to the poor and democracy and good economy and good healthy businesses and fair practices all over in all respects. And for me, it was a good word, the idea, I am your refuge, but it doesn't mean to hide and turn to religion and forget the rest. No. In fact, it's the other way. When the sacred is, in a sense, a deeper refuge, but also a strength, it sort of rekindles my desire to resist, to fight against that which is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
which is evil, which is unproductive and destructive.
Yeah, well, and I think that's an important thing that we can I can apply to like an individual, like my own individual life, because actually that stress that I was talking about, there's two things that came out of that, and the longer my life goes on, the more I see that my lessons are continually have this theme to them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those themes is let go and let God. Like my ego self is not allowed to, and I almost don't like saying it that way because it carries with it this Christian type baggage, and no offense, but
no,
I don't have, like, I have this different way of seeing it, but it's a way of getting that. The phrase is a way of getting it across. It's more of it's a universal mind sense as opposed to the individualized ego mind sense.
Yes.
And so
the heart of all religions that are legitimate.
Yeah. And yes.
I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
All spiritual systems that have this dynamic of let go and let the sacred, let God, are on point. On point.
Right. And what that leads into for me is a recognition that there is no other in a sense. And I know that's where we start to diverge in a way, but that is my next step from there, and that how I make the perceptual shifts necessary in order to move forward in that way. Is by continually recognizing that one thing, that there is no other.
Yeah, the intrinsic, the way I think of what you said and process, as a narrative creature, is the sense of singularity in the connection. The sense of the oneness.
Yeah. Again, that's another place where like because it's so fundamental to the nature of your life that wars of thousands of years could be fought over, but we have to come to the point where we see the other person's perception of it, because another part of that is that because we live in such an infinite existence, that in a way all perceptions are true and none of them are.
They are perceptions.
Yeah, but
they are not to be considered equal to what is being perceived. But that becomes the ego, kind of the ego fiction. As I see your face right now, and how I define it is reality. No, it is my perception.
Well, we could get into a frustrating game there, but that is the first philosophy
does that.
The first step of the Tao Te Ching is that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Nothing that we see or hear or perceive or speak is what the representation we create of it is.
Right. And I recently read, from neuropsychology, that our very biosystem already has a prejudicial, preferential aspect to what we do perceive at the core level before our consciousness. That there's already a filtering process, a core bioneural filtering process. So, in other words, the limitation of perception isn't just on the level of consciousness, it's preconscious. It's actually biological. Now, what to make of that? And what it does is lead to a certain kind of, for me, kind of a humility, appreciation of what I perceive. But don't take that as ultimate. Just take it as a perception. And if I put some words to it, definitional words, then, it's a tool. It's a working tool that we humans have for doing the project of life. This is not to sort of negate the importance of perceptions. Just don't absolutize them. It's like a working process. So it calls for a certain kind of balance between humility, own what I'm perceiving, but don't make it the ultimate, and be open to shifts, and especially cognitive shifts of, hey, so-and-so looks such and such. Okay, that's my perception, especially if a friend. And so on the basis of that perception, I say, hey, is something going on? No. Then if they're doing this gesture brushing off, then something's going on. And then I perceive that. So in a sense, perceptions are pieces of life happening, but they're not the totality. And don't presume that what you perceive is reality in its full isness.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about one of our natures is to trying to get to the bottom of things. Is
Yes.
We see things from a very cursory level, and especially you can't as an individual get to the bottom of everything. And I don't know. You can make an argument that we don't ever get to the bottom of anything, because there is.
Well,
you could say that, for instance, there are scientists who study at a deep level, I don't know, whatever it is, energy, let's say, just something simple. And and you might be able to find ways to transform energy and use energy in new ways, but you never really truly understand the depth of the nature of truly what it is. You have representations,
yes,
and equations.
Well said. Yes,
but you don't know what it is.
right, and that calls for kind of a healthy, on the one hand, humility, but it doesn't mean, well, then don't act. No, act as what you're perceiving sort of tends, like a magnet, pull you into in response. If I see a shift of a sad look in my buddy's face, friend's face, I'm going to perceive that. But, humility means I don't overdefine it in my godly mind, but I honor it as the perception in the moment and say, hey, I saw a shift in the cast of your face. Was it something I just said? Or, oh, no, when you said that, it triggered a memory. And it just, for a while, I wasn't hearing you. I was just in that kind of bad space, that bad memory space. Oh, okay, that's what I saw. So, here is the enigma. Our perceptions aren't entirely wrong about what's going on. But they are perceptions. They are filtered, working entities, but it doesn't mean that what is really there isn't a there. Something's really going on. Well, unless I'm totally delusional.
No, I mean, we can be insulting by saying that that's just your perception. In a way.
Yeah.
In which
yes.
And
that's wrong.
That can certainly be very insulting when somebody has worked their lifetime in order to develop their way of looking at things.
Yes. Especially professional lookers like us, therapists and life coaches and spiritual directors. And
yeah. Well, and so the point becomes is no matter how deep you look into something, it sort of becomes meaningless unless the way you come to look at something is helpful in a certain way. It creates tools for you to live a better life, really.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because otherwise, all you have is bragging rights to stand around and say, I have the better way of looking at, the more truthful way of looking at things. When, is there a very truthful way of looking at things? Is there the ultimate authority of truth? And that's another thing where religions can start to say, oh, I have the ultimate authority of truth.
Yeah, it can be egoized, and then it's, my God, quote unquote, the religious cudgel kind of stuff. On the other hand, there are standards of truthful living versus untruthful living, optimized living versus non-optimized, if not destructive forms of living. There is that might come from, in philosophy and ethics, ethical claims. It can come in religious systems, in moral claims. And it is interesting that Islam and Judaism and Christianity are tagged as ethical religions. They do assert that there are standards for optimized human living. And there is a list of standards that I have referred to from the biblical writings, and it so happened that, and folks, we do not rehearse this, but it so happened that I was thinking about that again at the end of a letter entitled Galatians, and there is a comparative given that talks about human behavior, and a comparative that has a standard about what does not work well for human life and what does work well for human life. And so what doesn't work, there is a list of things like idolatry, hostility, arguments, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish rivalries, dissensions, factions, envy, and so on and so forth. They do not lead to a good human collective result. By contrast, the fruit of the sacred spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, endurance, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against these sorts of things, the script says, there is no law. In other words, these are standards of human living that inherently is life-promoting, life-filling. And stress, the theme of endurance comes into here. Can you endure lifting a stronger weight to build up your muscle? Can you endure living with acting out teenagers in a teenage therapeutic service entity? Can you live with teenage angst and anger and it just comes at you? Can you endure that and help them to break through that anger to what's really going on? And kindness, but can you do it with kindness? Sometimes you may walk to the car after working with recalcitrant, hard to manage teenagers, and you go to the car and you scream. Okay, how kind not to scream at them. How kind to scream at your car window, and the faithfulness, you stay faithful to your sense of mission and purpose. I mean, these fruits of the sacred spirit are standards for being human, for being fully human as we are meant to be, But of these there's no law, so it's not like a legal, prescriptive, religious thing. It's an intrinsic realization. Intrinsic realization, yes. Yes. So the lack of kindness, unkindness does what between people? Unkindness does what to the soul who is unkind? And one of the core principles of our being psychic selves, I get what I give, and what I give, I get. And it reminds me of a simple story I read in Reader's Digest many years ago about this person whose bucket list included, I want 2 minutes of audience with Mother Teresa. And they flew to India and spent all that money and time and effort and begged to have audience with this very busy, compassionate, loving nun of the streets, Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa from what? Coming from where? The state of Michigan? What's that? No, I'm kidding, But anyway, so finally the person has a few moments of audience and seriously ask Mother Teresa, help me out here. What is the secret? What is the secret to the kind of deep, purposeful life? And the writing said, I can't verify it. You won't guess what word she said. One word. Smile. Smile. Now that, can connote all kinds of things, but I know as a psychologist, it's true. If I want to like you, it's not a matter of I wait for your smile. If I smile toward you, stranger, I'm meant to like you because I get what I give. It boomerangs back to me. And if I am an a-hole and treat people disrespectfully, hostilely, manipulatively, not only what does it do to them, but what does it do to me, the negative energy giver? So there are inherent standards for positivity, positive living in existence.
Well, see, this is where we start to put meaning back into an individual's perception. We might shoot down perceptions themselves, but so we could say that at a deeper level, what we're doing actually is we're learning we have a stage for learning to master energy, patterns of energy. But when you sort of almost science it like that way, you drain it of some of its meaning.
Okay.
But really the meaning is in the perception itself. The meaning is in the perception of the emotion and the relationship between two people.
Yes.
But really, at a deeper level,
yes,
you're learning to master and manipulate energy.
Yes, of course.
And your perception and then how you sense the energy coming, the corresponding effect, the cause and effect about what you put out and then what you get back is simply a matter. You can science the hell out of it and say that it's a matter of manipulation of energy.
I learned this framework from my mentor many years ago, spiritual mentor, teacher in my doctoral program, and he said this. I'm going to explain the universe, how the universe works. Oh, is that all? Not how to start your mower when it doesn't start for lawn mowing, but the magic of the universe. E, C, C, and F, like a triangle. E, energy systems. Reality is a complex array of energy systems. A line, 2 C and C. He used 1 C, I used 2. Connectivity and conversion. My seeing you is not my pictorial mind seeing you. The Eric that I see is a product of light waves bouncing off what we call your face. Those light waves hit photovoltaic cells in my eye system, and I create the image of you. It's perception. Perception. That is energy connected to and converted to seeing your face. And F stands for formats. That when we connect to a certain energy, and then the energetic aspect, is converted into forms of narrative forms of self-revelation, self-protection. So you can see ECCF happens continually. We are energy field connectors and converters. And we do that on the spiritual level as well. We connect to the sacredness. We convert the sacredness to working forms.
Yeah. The spirit of life. That keeps drawing my attention.
Oh, even the passion for life.
Oh yeah, you just have these wonderful materials.
My favorite theologian. Thank you. May I read just a few lines?
Oh, please do.
Thank you. This is Jürgen Moltmann, a theologian of hope, but he is a theologian of life, and he wrote lately the spirit of life in theology of the spirit, pneumatology, etc. But one of his earlier books. And by the way, we're meeting on the day after so-called Easter Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
One way to call it is Resurrection Day or Resurrection Sunday. There's an assertion that life wins over death. Okay? The life of this man, Yeshua, wins over death.
Right. And
to put it very simply. So Moltmann writes, what is there about this life of Jesus that makes it speak to us again and again? For those who refer to Jesus, and not only Christians refer to Jesus. I've talked to Muslims, and I've talked to Hindus, I've talked to Buddhists who see aspects of Jesus they can relate to. Okay. I believe it is not one or another of the miracle stories, but the entire life of great and passionate devotion that takes hold of us. Which passionate devotion, he asks? Not the yearning of the soul for a life free of pain in heaven, but the love for the realm of the sacred. He says kingdom of God, but I'm saying generically, love for the realm of the sacred in this world. Jesus' life is inspired not just by the wish for a life after death, but by the will for life before death. Yes, even against death. Where the sick are healed, lepers are accepted, and sins are not punished but forgiven, there life is present. Freed life, redeemed life, divine life is there. In this world, in our times, in the midst of us. But later in the next page, he says something, he uses an extraordinary, meaningful expression. Surrendering to the earth, which is part of living, is a meaningful death because it is fruitful dying. Fruitful dying. Is my living a fruitful kind toward my dying? That philosophically can be a core Stoic from Stoicism. It's the key Stoic philosophical question. Is not only my life worth living? How am I eating worth? How am I adding worth to my living? But is my life worth dying for? Wow. It's kind of like, whoa. Talk about, kind of meditative. Human life is alive, he writes, to the extent that it is loved and affirmed. I'm wearing an old Life is Good shirt. You know this Life is Good shirts? This goes way back when I was more of an active biker. And there is this Life is Good smiling character on a bike, going, wee! And I remember biking. And one of my favorite things I did when I worked out west, in addiction work out west, biking the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Right.
Loved mountain biking. So I was biking on Paint Creek Trail in Rochester Hills, Michigan. I came to a place where there was kind of a cavernous cut, like a little valley to the right, and there was a picket fence separating me on the path from that cauldron. And there were, in big black print, these words on the picket fence. I love you, life. I literally screeched to a halt, got off my bike, walked my bike, laid it down on the field, and just went closer and just stood there meditatively. Just, my God, yes. My God, yes. And I have worked with people in suicidal despair, ready to kill themselves. Why are they in suicidal despair? Because they're giving up on life. They don't believe in life. They don't believe it's good. And if nothing else, my care and my love, hopefully. And of course, one of the techniques in therapy with people who are quite suicidal, but not totally crazy, so to speak, is to have that keep life contract. You can't kill yourself until you promise you have talked to me, right? And it's funny, you think, what is this, kind of a trick? No. If people really believe you care, and they say, okay, if I'm seriously ready to call myself, I'll call you, Olaf. And people have. I can tell you a story, a couple of stories, dramatic stories where people literally are at the point of extricating themselves from life. And my father's partner, my father called me when his partner, they ran a small architectural firm in Chicago. And when the Iran-Iraq war happened and so many federal government contracts were just cut from under, like happening now to people, the small architectural firm of my father and his partner, lifelong partner, sank, closed down. They had to fire people, lose people, just like that. And my dad's partner, owner of the business, was ready to kill himself. And my dad called me desperately saying, what do I do? What do I do? Are there some psychological tricks I can pull on? And basically, I guess in so many words, I said, be there for him in care. Be there with him and for him in care. And that kept his partner alive. Because his partner admitted that later when he got out of the suicidal despair cycle.
Mm.
He said, Rudy, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. And part of what Rudy said was, don't pay me anything. We're going to hang in there. Don't pay me anything. I can fall on Social Security, which could. He was that old,
Mm-hmm.
But that's not fair to you. No. I promise I will be with you as long as you want me to be with you. And slowly they rebuilt an architectural business that was never as hot as it was, but nevertheless, out of which came a couple of architectural projects my dad and they did that I'm very proud of. And one of the things they were doing was converting kind of broken down apartments, using remodeling architectural ways to improve those apartments, but for medium and low cost housing, not upper end. Everyone wants to be upper end. If everyone is upper end, we'll all tip
Right.
into hell because you got to have lower end too.
Sure.
Anyway, does that make sense? At the core of spirituality is the love of life. I know I'm kind of on a preacher's binge here, but here is another from this book, The Spirit of Life. I promise, one more thing.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
When I love God, I love the beauty of bodies, the rhythm of movements, the shining of eyes, the embraces, the feelings, the sense, the sounds of all this protean creation. When I love you, my God, I want to embrace it all, for I love you with all of my senses in the creations of your love. In all the things that encounter me, you are waiting for me. This is not ethereal, ghostly life. That's not the spiritual life. Real life, passionate life. And the last few lines. The experience of God deepens the experiences of life. It does not reduce them, for it awakens the unconditional yes to life. The more I love God, the more gladly I exist. The more immediately and wholly I exist, the more I sense the living sacred. Living sacred dash the inexhaustible well of life and life's eternity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric, for letting me speak from these two fabulous writings.
Yeah. So, happy Easter.
May the resurrection be a quality of our lives.
And I'm not promoting that. I need to throw out there that I'm not promoting that.
Yeah,
Nor the interesting thing is that when we bring up Jesus in the context of Easter, I go, what comes to mind for me, I'll have to admit,
I
is
love
that,
your face as you talk.
Well, because it's like I feel like the Christians stole, spring, and it's like these were. There have been cultures who celebrated these times of year before. It had nothing to do with Jesus.
Well, America is doing
with life.
America is doing well with what I call secular Easter, and that's why I technically I don't use the word Easter for marking Resurrection Sunday. I mark it as Resurrection Day, the assertion that life wins over death, and Easter to me is bunnies, candies, hunting for eggs, families getting together, doing barbecues. Yes, celebrating that spring is coming. I mean, I relate to some of the sentiments that I'm at least picking up from you.
Yeah, well, and I would say that the death is a part of the cycle of life.
That's what we're saying.
And death.
Fruitful dying.
Yeah, and
fruitful dying.
So, in order for the lobster to grow a new shell, it has to stress out and lose its old shell, and then sort of be reborn as a new, bigger lobster. Right? So.
I have my fun-making mind. If you want to be happy, have fun in your mind. That's one of my mantras. I suddenly fantasized a heart attack right now and I die. I'm not here anymore. And suddenly I come to the pearly gate and suddenly, what happened? Hey, St. Peter says there, sitting on a rock at the gate, pearly gate, you just died. Oh. Do you know where I was? Oh, yeah. You were doing a podcast. Peter, I have a question. Was that Fruitful dying? And yes. Because it's part of my passion for life to talk about these things that can kind of be esoteric and ethereal, but can also be very real. Mm. And I love our mutual commitment to talk about this meaningfully, authentically, even though some of our